Raymond, tell us about the shared death experience you had with your mother.
Back in 1994, I think it was, I went out to Phoenix to visit my friend Paul Perry, a journalist, and I was talking with him about this. And I had a lecture to give out there in Phoenix, so I went and I asked for a show of hands of how many people in that audience knew about these shared death experiences from personal experience. And it was well over a dozen. I think it was almost 20 people in that room of, say, 100 or so people. So this is a very common thing. And so I was kind of thinking about writing about this. And Paul and I at that time were kind of thinking about a book on the subject. Well, in 1994, I went out to Nevada and at a conference with other psychiatrists and psychologists and scientists. And my idea was to create a program where we could investigate shared death experiences systematically. And this happened to be on Mother's Day, 1994, in May, when the conference came to an end. So I went out to the shopping mall and using an antique instrument called a phone booth, I called up my mother to wish her Happy Mother's Day. And I remember to this day how chipper her voice sounded. It was very different from her usual way. I said, well, how are you? And I remember how cheerful her voice was. She said, oh, I'm fine, in a very upbeat way. And then she said, and yesterday I developed this rash, and my brothers and sisters had taken her to the doctor, who examined her and said that he didn't think it was anything significant, just an idiosyncratic reaction, but that as a precaution he gave her an appointment to see another doctor on the day after Mother's Day, Monday. So on Mother's Day, 1994, I talked to my mom and it seemed like everything was fine. She had a rash, but she's doing great. So the next day, my mother went to this doctor who said, you have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and you have 2 days to 2 weeks to live. So my wife and I went down to Macon, Georgia, and we're with my mother the whole time. 2 weeks later to the day, she did die. And when my mother died, my wife and I and my sister and one of my brothers-in-law had a shared death experience. It was incredible. I just don't have the words to describe what this was like. My sister said that she felt the presence of my father, who had died 18 months before, there in the room. But my experience was, again, it was like an impossible to describe change of geometrical arrangement. It was like suddenly I was no longer in a 3-dimensional space, but I was in kind, if you can imagine, 2 funnels joined at the narrow point, so that you're in this kind of hourglass-like configuration of space. It's very hard to describe, where there's a kind of dynamism, and the light is totally different. You have to say light because that's the closest thing to it, but it's some other kind of energy, I guess, and filled the room.